much, Fania. Thank you. And thank you for being here today. And thanks, Joss, for the lovely screen design, because I took it from Joss's previous presentation. Today I'm looking at immigrant entrepreneurs, and it's called a question of capital because different kinds of capital emerged. I'm not finished my PhD, I'm analysing the findings, so I'll be looking at how I'm doing that as we go through. So an overview of what I'm talking about is, why am I doing this research? What were the challenges? The fields I won't talk about much, we'll just put them up there. If you have any questions, I'd welcome you to ask questions. The methodology I've used, the preliminary findings, the significance as I see at this point of those findings, and then possibly what's really most interesting are the stories, just some of the stories to illustrate where people have come from. I didn't know who was going to be in the audience today, so some of the information I put in there was thinking there may be people from different backgrounds. So if I just go through some slides quite quickly, and if you want to ask questions, please stop me, but some of those things may not be of interest to you. So why did I do it? Probably for a lot of reasons, but the reasons I've put here are that New Zealand, many of New Zealand's businesses have actually been started by immigrants. There's a book published by Hunter who did his PhD on the immigrants from 1980 to 1910. So Lion Nathan, Helen Steins, GlaxoSmithKline, a lot of those, you recognise about 20 famous names of our organisations, our businesses were started by those early pioneers. But in fact, and so they contribute a lot to the economy. But the Department of Labour doesn't actually look at researching immigrant entrepreneurs. Their focus is on skilled labour, and they do a great deal of research all the time on skilled labour who come into New Zealand, but almost nothing on immigrant entrepreneurs. And the reason for that is, so there was my gap in the market, as it were, gap in the literature. But there's also, when we looked at international literature, there are some gaps there as well. My interest in entrepreneurs, when I'm neither an entrepreneur nor an immigrant, was really started by Howard Frederick with the Global Entrepreneurship Monitoring program and the GEM. And I was part of about 13 to 15 people involved on that. And that was a really exciting project, and I attended conferences on entrepreneurship, and we're looking particularly, I guess, from a communication background, looking at social capital and the importance of social capital to any immigrants coming in. And Debbie Rowland and I were able to get a Unitec grant to look at entrepreneurial women's networks in New Zealand, not immigrant women's networks, entrepreneurial women's networks. And that was another fascinating step. So all of these things piqued my interest. I'm married to an immigrant, so a little bit of that came into it as well. Why a question of capital? Well, there's always a need for financial capital, but perhaps not always as great importance. It didn't figure as largely in this as it does in some of an investor literature and angel investment literature. But in the immigrant entrepreneurship literature, there's a considerable emphasis placed on social capital, because immigrants traditionally, and a lot of the literature is from North America and from Europe, and they're talking about communities such as Chinese communities, Hispanic communities, Vietnamese communities, where people have moved in without economic capital, without financial capital. Their human capital, their qualifications, their language hasn't transferred to their new country. So they have had to rely on their social capital, on their networks and information to supplement that. So a great deal of the literature is focused in this area. The majority of the literature is focused in that area. But much more recently, we've been looking at human capital has come into the picture. And human capital, I'll give you definitions of these, but that's the qualifications that people bring. It's what our degrees are about. And business experience. And over the last possibly 10 years, research in Canada has been picking up that people's human capital has been able to bypass the need for them to access their communities. And this is an area that has not been researched at all in New Zealand that I'm aware of. Social capital, I thought in New Zealand, our communities, our markets are so small. How would someone survive if they're an immigrant entrepreneur? So what is the role of human capital? Their business acumen coming in here. And the fourth kind of capital, cultural capital, hasn't emerged at all in the literature, but it is something that gradually came through. So what were the challenges? How do you identify an immigrant entrepreneur? Have you got any idea? How many people here were born overseas, outside New Zealand? Okay, perhaps the New Zealanders should raise their hand. No, I don't. Okay. Anyone here started a business? Okay, so we have entrepreneurs in this room and we have immigrants in this room. But how do you identify an immigrant entrepreneur? It's challenging. If you can identify an immigrant entrepreneur, and then you have to persuade them to participate, what evidence will that provide? Because everybody is so different. They're coming from completely different backgrounds. You don't know what their education is, their business experiences, their cultural background is, how long they've been in New Zealand. So how useful would that be? So considerable challenges. There's definition debates. What's an entrepreneur? There is a whole spectrum in defining the word entrepreneur. Social capital itself started with one concept and it's expanded from individuals through families, from communities, into nations. So countries now, with Bowling alone, talk about social capital. So again, a huge area. An immigrant entrepreneur, which kind are we talking about? The under-resourced immigrant entrepreneur, or well-resourced that we see in Silicon Valley, where people in Silicon Valley, particularly India, people from India, people from China, started many of the businesses there, and the latest trend in that is that they're going back to India and China and starting with Silicon Valleys in those countries. But that's not part of my research. The literature, just to give this is where I started in this area with social capital. I had to look at entrepreneurial literature and immigrant entrepreneurial literature. So those are just some of the fields. After that I added cultural capital and human capital, but just an overview. I just carry on, I think, unless there are any questions about that. Methodology. I started here and I had to move to there. I call it the morphing of methodology. So what is it now? Well, it started as being strongly positivist, and it would have been good for me at the end if that's how it stayed, but I wouldn't have learned nearly as much. So it's qualitative, constructivist, interpretivist. So that means I am really having to interpret my results now. That's exciting. I said about the challenges of finding the immigrant entrepreneurs, how to find them, how to have some meaningful assessment from them. Well, my good fortune, I suppose, was to find something, a sampling frame called a long-term business visa. And there are some conditions around the visa that means that people have to come in with similar amounts of money, business experience, acumen. They come in, they won't probably have social capital and a basic level of English. So that sampling frame has helped to even up some of the requirements. How did I find people? Well, Initially, I had to work through the Department of Labour. They had control over the visa, and of course they are constrained by their privacy requirements. So they had an initial number of 1,500 approximately people. They were doing a survey of whom 370 responded to their survey, and then they sent out an email request. They thanked those people for being involved in their survey and attached my request to it. 35 people responded to that, saying, "Are you an expression of interest?" of whom 16 agreed to the interviews. So the numbers have come down. Now that might not quite startling, but it is a very small number. But one reason I think in reading the literature is why immigrant entrepreneurs haven't been researched is because you can't get them to agree. You can't find them. So that is kind of typical even of a government survey. The other thing was that most immigrants come to Auckland. About 60% of Aucklanders generally are immigrants. So I was pretty amazed, because I only had email addresses, to discover these were scattered around New Zealand. And that was completely untypical. I had imagined I'd be able to pick from all these large numbers and I'd interview them. But 3 came from Auckland, 2 came from Wellington, and the others are haphazardly, I would say. They're not meant to be too correct because I don't want you to be able to identify them, but you get an idea, they are scattered. And I wasn't resourced to go around and interview them in person. So we did telephone interviews, over the phone, semi-structured interviews. So why did I said there were certain conditions regarding the long-term business visa. The word entrepreneur has numbers of interpretations. Often it comes down to small business, because that's the only way you can identify somebody. Whether you are innovative with that small business, pretty subjective, and it's difficult to get someone like that. So the visa requires, under that definition, that you are entrepreneurial if you have started a business or joined a business and you have operated that business effectively for 2 years at the beginning. Later that was extended to 3 years. So it gave me a definition, a kind of a definition to work with, and you can apply for residence as an entrepreneur. Part of your visa meant you had to have adequate financial capital to support your business venture and to support your family through the setting up of the business. You were not to call on the state for any help. So that said, there wasn't an amount. It wouldn't have been less than $500,000, 500,000. It would often have to be more than that. But it meant that the word adequate was adequate from the terms of the government departments. They had to submit a business plan, because most people fall over when they come to New Zealand. They don't know what our conditions are. Almost everyone is used to a bigger market. You don't get much smaller than New Zealand. And it's a huge shock. So the business plan, in the plan you are asked to demonstrate that you know what you're going to do, what your market size is here, and whether it's good for New Zealand. And you have to demonstrate sufficient human capital. Have you had enough business experience? Have you got qualifications to implement it? So the government vets that before they give you the visa. And so from my point of view, it gave me the chance to ensure that the people I'm looking at started with similar levels of resources, which was really helpful. They had to come through the same entry. Initially there were no English language requirements, but there was a review of the policy in 2001, and after 2002 they implemented an IELTS of 5.5. There is a requirement on the visa that people are able to socially cohere with the community, and I think without the English requirement people would find that very difficult. Those are the terminology. I've defined them. If you're comfortable with that, I will